What up? All right, back at it. Here we are, Lockdown Learning Live. My name's Lee again. Today we're going to be talking a little about Lift. If you guys saw the title there, episode 3, Lift Awakens, and we had so many ideas on this. So we're gonna have some fun with it. We're gonna talk later with Phil again. We saw him last video, and we're gonna do a little Star Warsy thing. As you can see, the scenery is a little bit different. This is actually my bedroom right here. And the reason I did that is we're going to do a little experiment later. And I'll add it right here. This is my little wind tunnel that I was talking about. So we'll go over here. I kind of failed, but I'm hoping that you guys can do a little bit better. And we're going to dive into that a little bit. So here we go. And we're back. All right, so real quick, since we're talking about how Lift is created today, we talked a little bit about the structure of the wing and a little about the shape of the wing. And I had some cardboard, and it was kind of abstract because I had this like piece of cardboard and you could see my face through it. And you're like, what the hell is he looking at? So real quick, we're going to go over to Kevin, our buddy over at Sling, and he's going to show us a real wing, like the real shape of a wing on an actual airplane. Hey, Kevin, can you hear us?
Yep, I got you.
So, show us a little what's going on here.
Well, I got a little thumbnail here, so you gotta tell me if I'm showing you what you want to see.
We're looking at a wing, that's for sure. That's the leading edge.
There's the leading edge. Here's the side portion. There's a little bit of an edge to the wing here. So, trying to get a shot so you can see the cross section of it.
Yeah, that's pretty good. What does the tail look like? Does it look similar?
Yeah, the tail is very similar. Let's go over to the tail. So the tail has a very similar cross section to it.
Yeah, look at that.
Better.
So just like I was showing you guys before, you can see it's kind of bulbous in the middle, and then it kind of points at the back, and in the front it's nice and rounded. So today we're going to kind of go into why it's created this way, and what about that makes Lift. All right, Kevin, we're going to say goodbye. Thank you so much for your help.
All right.
See ya.
See ya.
All right, cool. So a lot of what this has to do with, and we talked a little bit about before with streamlines and kind of how the air flows over the airfoil. I'm going to pull up a video here. Essentially what's happening is as that airflow, that streamline, just like we saw in the car, right? We saw that streamline going over the car. The wind, or that air, the relative wind that we're creating, is changing direction over the airfoil. And actually, before I hop into a video, we're going to hop over here to NASA because NASA knows everything. And I want you guys to have a little reference here, because this is kind of what I look at when I think about, how Lift is created. And it's broken down into really simple equation, actually. And forgive me, because I'm not used to using this computer since I'm at home. So I'm just having a little bit of technical difficulty. But give me one moment. I'm going to have that song stuck in my head from the intro video. All right. So here we go. And view image. Okay, let's get this on here. Share screen. Select window screen. That's this one. And we're going to enter the Twilight Zone for a second. Where is it? There it is, the Twilight Zone. Wom, wom, wom. Okay. I hope all you guys can see this. This is the basics of everything that happens in our world, right? And it's really quite simple, right? F equals M times A. That's what that asterisk is. It's basically like a multiplying symbol. So a force is always equal to the mass of an object times its acceleration, right? And acceleration, you can think about acceleration like in your car. When you hit the gas pedal, you accelerate. You go from 0 to some forward speed. That's what acceleration is. And mass is essentially just the density of stuff in an object. So some things can be really big, like a balloon, like a weather balloon or something, or like a volleyball, or like one of those big balls they hit up in stadiums and stuff. But it's not very massive because it's kind of empty. It doesn't have a lot of stuff in it. Whereas something like a bowling ball could be smaller than that, but still have a lot of stuff in it. That's what mass is. It's not about its actual size. It's about the amount of stuff that's in it. So even air has a mass to it. Even air has a mass. Back to the Twilight Zone. Sorry. So air's got a mass, and what we're doing is we're changing its acceleration. That's what actually creates the force. There's all sorts of crazy principles, Bernoulli's principle, pressure, density, all these kind of different things that we could talk about. But when you really boil it down and get really simple about it, it's about this simple equation. It's about a force being created by accelerating some mass of stuff, right? So we might dive into Bernoulli's principle in a different video after I show you some stuff. But for now, we're just going to think about it this way, where we're changing the direction of this flow, and it's accelerating because of that. And then that's what's actually creating this lifting force. And let's go back to here. Stop screen share. Okay, we're back here. So real quick, I'm going to hop over to this thing. So this is kind of a fun little experiment that I developed. I hope you guys can see it. It says a little iPad there. So I put my iPad outside. It's out on my deck. And I have some water in there. So there's a couple things we kind of have to assume when we're doing this, all right? So we're dealing with water, all right? And an airplane deals with air. Now, both of these things are fluids, right? These are both fluids. So we're talking about fluid dynamics today, actually. And a lot of people, they'll say like, well, air is not a fluid. It acts a lot like a fluid, especially when it's moving, right? So just kind of assume that for a second, that our air in this example is going to be water. Now, what I did with this is I just pumped some water in a circuit, right? So the water is going to pump in a circle in this little tube, and I'm going to see if I can make an object lift. Now, spoiler alert, I failed because I chose an object that was too heavy, and it's a weird shape. But we'll hop out there in a second, and we'll take a look at what's happening here. Before we go into that, I want to talk a little bit about what's happening here. And there's a lot of cool videos online about this. I found this guy, he was having a blast on YouTube. He was like doing all sorts of stuff with air blowers and stuff. So if you guys are nice and bored, which I'm sure some of you are, then you guys can take a look at these different Bernoulli's principle. Let me pull up a video real quick. I was spending so much time trying to get my wind tunnel to work that I looked at the clock and I was like, oh my God, we have to start the live session. And then I looked at all the stuff I needed to prepare and I was like, dang, I got so caught up in this Bernoulli's principle. Yeah, this guy.
Hi guys, welcome.
There's YouTube messing with me now. Bear with me, everybody. Well, this is interesting. It's not letting me do it. And we're going to have to just go show it because I guess I'm not able to click on the video. How weird. Whew. How about that? We have failed. Maybe. Bear with me. Bear with me. Back into the Twilight Zone. Okay, I'm going to ask for a lifeline here. Phil, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
How's it going?
I need you to be my eyes for a second.
All right, let's do it.
Can you see the video that I'm clicking here?
I'm definitely in the Twilight Zone.
You're still in the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, definitely still Twilight Zone from my point of view, and it looks like I'm about to fall into my computer. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now I'm looking at the YouTube.
You're looking at the YouTube.
Mm-hmm. Multiple videos there.
Yeah, and I just can't click on the video. How weird, right? I don't know.
Yeah, that's super weird. So when you click on it, it's just not going to play.
Yeah, this has never happened to me before. Of course, it happens when we go live. Here we are live.
Of course.
Can't click on the video.
Of course.
Right. Okay.
Interesting. Yeah, that's weird, man. It's definitely coming up, but so it's just not playing, huh?
Nope. Okay. We're gonna move on. All right. We're going to say goodbye to Phil just for a second. We're going to have to come back to him earlier than planned because I have to we're going to improvise. Here we go. Okay. And I think, Phil, that I left you unmuted. So you can talk if you want to babble on and talk to our viewers and say hi to everybody. Then you can while I'm improvising. Okay, so I'm going to go plug this thing in. Here we go.
Not. First of all, experiments are supposed to be fun anyway. A lot of the time don't work, and that's not what it's about. But I think it shows if it can show lifting actions that happen as a result of pressure differences that result from fluids in motion, that it could show that lift exists whether the medium is a gas or a liquid. And I think in that respect it makes it very, very relevant to aviation, even if we're using liquid, because we're still generating reaction forces the same way. The airplane is generating a reaction force the same way that a submarine is doing effectively, so it shows the relationship, I think, between moving through a gas or a liquid. I think it's a cool experiment, man.
Yeah, dude, I had a lot of fun with this, and I spent way too much time on it. So I hope you guys can have as much fun as I did. Basically,
it's like my Star Wars PowerPoint. Yeah.
Yeah, you guys can see here. I'm gonna just remove you for a second, Phil. You guys can see here. I have some water dripping from a tube. No, there's a little object in this tube, and we're gonna see if the object actually can produce lift, and then we'll talk about what happened here. So I'm gonna hop out for a second. All right, so I know that might be a little bit confusing and a little bit too basic for some people. So essentially what I did in there, really simply, is I put a little object. It was like a little crystal guy, and he was way too dense. He was like way too massive for his size. So when I put him in the stream and tried to get him to fly, he totally didn't fly. And coincidentally, it's in the shape of a little angel. So angels can't fly. I'm sorry. Sad. No. Essentially, what we're working with here is an object that was too heavy for the acceleration of the flow to create enough lift, right? And if it was a lighter object, that amount of flow could totally create the lift that we needed. And I'm kicking myself for not being able to show you guys this video, because this guy goes into all sorts of stuff. He pulls out so many different objects, and it's fantastic. So let's see right here. We're going to pull Phil back in while I'm improvising, and maybe he can talk a little bit about what we saw.
Well, I just had a question. I was wondering if you were able to elaborate on like the principles like that the experiment would have, was intending to show, like a little bit more about like the principles of maybe relating it to our discussion like today about the production of lift and what we would have effectively been looking at. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? And maybe like, does it matter that, I mean, obviously it matters that the shape of it is weird, but I mean, to an extent, really anything can be an airfoil. It's just that most things are terrible airfoils. Looks like Lee maybe cut out. So while he takes that apart, or whatever he's doing, guess we'll sit tight here. This totally relates to one of the things that we're going to talk about today. Like when Lee hands over when he hands it over to me very shortly, I have a PowerPoint presentation for you guys that's going to elaborate on this. And very much in the same way that this was an experiment, a real life experiment with the generation of lift with like weird objects. It was a weird kind of like experiment. The PowerPoint that we've got today is a quick discussion, a quick, really fun thought experiment on the lift that a few different Star Wars ships would make should they actually exist in real life. So it's cool that we get a little bit of like an actual experiment here, and then a thought experiment yet to come.
I think I did it. Can you see this?
Yeah. The video's up for sure right now. Nice one.
Check this out. I just had to do some magic. All right, here we are. So, real quick, this guy, he has a lot of fun with this. You guys can look at this video if you want later and watch the whole video. We're not going to watch the whole video. We're just going to watch this portion because it's pretty cool. And he has basically an air blower that he's got a ball in. Now, the misconception that we have here is that the air like being shoved up is actually keeping the ball in the air. But you can see here, he displays, I'm not sure if this is the right size. He displays these arrows coming around the ball, right? And this is kind of what I wanted to show you guys. I don't have a leaf blower, unfortunately. I've got aquarium stuff because I'm weird. But here he has like a leaf blower and this big old like beach ball, and he's shooting air up. He's got two arrows here. He's got an arrow going up and an arrow coming down, right? So we got two different arrows. Now, what these arrows are representing, the down one is representing the weight of the ball, right? The ball is being brought to Earth. If you picked up a ball and you dropped it, it's going to fall down to Earth. Now, the up arrow is basically the flow of air coming from this leaf blower. Now, if you're thinking this is being kept in the air by simply just the up motion, you're partially correct. The air hitting it is creating some sort of counter lift. Now, what's keeping the ball in place, right? What's keeping the ball in place and not falling off either way is that low pressure that's being created. As you saw with the little lines and his little writing there, he scribbled on the video a little bit. He's a little bit better video manager than me, obviously. So here he has these low pressure areas, and this is what's keeping the ball in the center. The same principle is what happens when we shove airflow over an airfoil. Airflow over an airfoil Just like we saw in the cars with the streamlines, the airflow diverted over the streamlines. It's creating a low pressure on the top of the wing, and that's creating some lift, right? So if we piece this all together, right, we're changing the direction of the flow. That flow creates a low pressure, and lift is created. So some of the fun that we wanted to do today, because it was Star Wars themed, is we're going to pop over to Phil. He's got a little presentation for us, and he's going to talk about, you know, some of these Star Wars ships, like would they actually create lift? So I'm just going to drop it off completely to Phil.
All right. Awesome, Lee. Thank you so much, man. That was really cool. I'm glad that it ended up working out and that the video came up, because it's a great example of how symmetry actually will plays a role in the equal deflection of a fluid, and you know, you could create a low pressure on either side, and we see that a lot with we see that is the basic principle with symmetrical airfoils. Not all airfoils are symmetrical. So we'll take a look at that later on in the presentation. But first, I'll share my screen with you guys as we hop into episode 3, Revenge of the Lift. Right zone. All right, you guys should be able to see my screen. And Lee, if you guys can't, let me know. You know, if there are any problems, just let me know.
We're good.
So, okay, very good, very good. So today we're going to be talking about, we're going to be carrying on the discussion of lift that Lee was talking about, and got a short presentation here. It should be about 15 minutes or so. And basically, like I said, we're going to be going through this thought experiment of looking at some of the Star Wars ships and just kind of looking at some fictitious like designs and applying real world actual things that we as pilots have gone over like in ground, and applying the actual real world knowledge, ground knowledge, to fictitious designs, and interesting thought experiment to see how it would work. I also have examples of real life airplanes and designs, aircraft designs that probably inspired a lot of these things that we actually see, that, you know, we helps us understand how these aircraft may behave if they actually existed in real life. So let's take a look at that and expand a little bit on what you guys have already been talking about with the production of lift. Okay, so let's talk about what's to come, and a little bit on what's the menu. We're going to be spending a few, just a little bit on each of these topics. Okay, so first thing will be like going over lift basics, and just nothing that you know, if you're coming into it as a, even as a relatively new private pilot watching this, you know, you've undoubtedly had, you know, maybe 1 or 2 ground sessions on how the wing of your airplane actually works. You know, this is a familiar diagram if you're a commercial student, where you're looking at the way that thrust is produced on a propeller. You know, we see airfoils all over the place, and the production of lift like all over the aircraft. So it would definitely behoove us to revisit lift for a second, and just to get on the same page of what we're talking about before we get into anything fictitious and hypothetical. Then we just need to spend a little bit of time just clarifying and elaborating a bit on what Lee was talking about, the importance of operating the craft through a fluid and through a medium through which we can, you know, have a fluid that we can use, that we can deflect over these surfaces. In the absence of a medium to deflect, it's kind of like sound. You know, without a fluid, there's no sound either. You know, that's what sound is, you know, the movement of waves of compressed molecules throughout a medium. And if you don't have that medium, you do not have the ability to actually move anything. You know, that's what sound is, and that's what lift is really essentially just the movement of air. So just to touch on that and clarify that that's the kind of spaceships that we're talking about. Well, a few examples of the ships that I enjoy. I'm a big Star Wars fan, but I'm not a super nerd Star Wars. So I bet you know, hopefully I don't butcher too many things. I'm sure there are bigger fans of Star Wars out there than I am, but I know I loved it. I know I grew up with it, and so few of these ships are definitely like, you know, dear to me, and they're even nostalgic, you know. And one of them is the classic X-wing. It's the you know, the staple of the rebel like forces, assault and pushback on the Empire, and it's one of the most badass looking ships I think out there. So we look at that and take a look at the way that if it were to exist, the way that it would produce lift and the drag, the forces of drag that would result from the lift that it produced. The next is another classic. We'll look at Luke's Skywalker's speeder and look at and relate that to ground effect, and when the lift that it's producing, how that lift is characterized when it's very low to the ground. And we'll look at a real life example of aircraft that utilize this increase in performance in ground effect. Finally, we'll look at a more modern ship that came out, I believe, first in episode 1. Not everybody's favorite one, but still, I think this is one of the sickest looking spaceships in the series, the N1 Starfighter. And one thing that I was drawn to about this one was a few different things regarding wing design and the way that delta-shaped wings produce lift, and also just taking a look inside the wing and how an airplane produces lift from a structural standpoint, that a wing needs to be strong in order to produce lift, not just curved, you know? So we'll take a look inside there. You can see there the ribs and the spar actually in the wing itself. So with that, let's get into some lift basics just to cover our bases, okay? So what we're looking at and what we've been talking about that Lee pointed out is the airfoil. We're talking about a curved shape, a curved surface that we can manufacture in a specific way to have it flow, you know, move through the air. And as it moves through the air, it will push the air out of the way in a very specific way that will cause it to that will cause the air to be deflected over the top of the surface and produce that lifting force that we're looking for. Few terms that we're going to just want to be refresh ourselves on that will help us kind of talk about these different aspects of these ships and the hypothetical, you know, lift that these ships might produce. In particular, the leading edge in the front. This is the shape of the airfoil right here. So the leading edge in the front, of course, and the trailing edge in the back. And then, of course, the line that is formed between the leading edge and the trailing edge, that chord line, and the angle of attack that is formed by that chord line. These are just the basics in terms of being able to talk about lift at all and whether an airfoil may or may not do it, or if it's efficient or not, or you know, where that lift's going to come from. It's just important that we revisit those concepts of you know, what it is that we're actually looking at when we're looking at that profile shot of the airfoil. Okay, so that is the anatomy of an airfoil. One of the other basics is how is this lift generated? You know, we need to just revisit kind of what we've already been talking about, that it really comes down to the deflection of air. So here what we're looking at is another NASA Langley, again, Lee on point. NASA's got it all. This is, you can find videos like this all over YouTube of airfoils in test chambers and wind tunnel chambers. That is basically what Lee built for himself over there, but just not instead of air and oil smoke streams like this to demonstrate laminar flow, he was using water. But you know, it's all fluid. So lift, we can see lift being generated actually in real time as the angle of attack of this airfoil increases. The deflection of the air, the air, like Lee was saying, you know, force equals mass times acceleration. The air, the mass of this air is accelerated over this wing, producing this vacuumous low pressure area right here, and that results in forces increasing. Force equals mass times acceleration. So the more we accelerate that air, the greater the force is. They're positively related. And what you're looking at here is the low pressure resulting from that air deflection. But honestly, all it comes down to is air deflection. So if we have a spaceship that does not deflect air efficiently, and if it or if it's able to go super fast and deflect air that way, you know, we're talking about lift. Now, is it efficient? You know, is it? We don't. You know, we can get into stall characteristics and other things associated with lift. But you know, the main question today is: does it produce lift? And if it does, then what other things about it can we infer based on our actual real-world understanding of lift and aerodynamics? And it starts with the understanding that comes all from our ability to deflect air. This is a great example of something that you would never see on an airplane, but it's a great example of that anything really can be an airfoil. I mean, if you think about it, like an airfoil is a specific shape, like everything can be, I should say anything can deflect air, but it's only, airfoils that are specifically designed that we can control it. Otherwise, it's very inefficient. But this is a great example of something that has a leading edge, has a trailing edge. It's got a chord line to it. It's got curvature. It's got camber. It's got curvature above and below the chord. It's got turbulence off of the end after that air is being deflected, and it's got a pressure differential as this air is being deflected. But obviously, burger joints are in the food business and not the aeronautical engineering business for a reason. But funny nonetheless. I like this as well. Mach 0.05, by the way, is the speed
could this
that.
hamburger create lift?
Yeah, so that's exactly what you're looking at. What you're looking at is the it's kind of goes back to your beach ball scenario, I think. And I'd like to know your thoughts on this as well. But basically, this is a symmetrical separation right here. And as this air is being deflected and that low pressure above and below is being created, there's a tendency for the burger to accelerate in one direction or the other. This is kind of an example where I think if you shot this burger out far enough, fast enough out of a cannon, not only would the burger separate, but you'd think about the way that it would separate. The buns would come apart, and then you would basically have an airfoil above and below, and this bun would go up like that. This bun would go down like that, and the patty would effectively be a symmetrical disc that would just continue. But that's exactly how this burger would separate, and that's because of the lift that it's producing on either side of the bun.
Sweet.
Super dope. Okay, so now let's talk about drag, but not these kinds of drag. The production of lift, there is an inescapable detrimental force that we need to be aware of as we also talk about lift, and that is drag. So drag comes in two different flavors, and as we produce lift, we produce induced drag. That's the drag that is associated with the force of lift itself. So the more lift we produce, the more induced drag we produce, and that's not super desirable. What drag does is it drags us back. It holds us back from going forward, and that's where fuel economy comes in and other things. The more drag, the harder the airplane has to work to move through the fluid. The more energy it's going to take. And the more energy that the energy that we're talking about is typically stored chemical energy in the fuel that we need to burn to move this airplane through the air. So if we can do things to reduce that, the drag, that's what we need to do, and maximize the lift. That's what we're going for. We're looking to maximize lift and minimize drag. Another type of drag that we can do something more proactively about in the design phases of the airplane is actually parasitic drag. So this is the type of drag that, as things hang off of the airplane, or, we have a very broad leading edge, or we've got, these tires, these wheel struts that hang off, a very broad nose, maybe imperfections in the way that, maybe we didn't totally laser cut super perfect the skin. These are the aspects of that contribute to parasitic drag, and we'll be looking at both of these as we get into our spaceships and talk about lift. Okay, so enough about the boring lift basics that we've heard about a million times. Let's talk about some spaceships and get some thought experimentation going. First, let's clarify what we mean by ships in space versus in an atmosphere. Very simple slide. We're going to be talking about ships, in space. Like we said, there's no fluid, so the discussion is moot, about aerodynamics in space. astrodynamics is very interesting, but it all relates to thrust and where we're pointing the actual the force of that thrust and causing the ship to actually accelerate in certain directions based on where we're pointing the thrust, versus there are a lot more forces at work on in a aircraft going through the atmosphere, because you've got the need to push through an atmosphere. You've got the weight of the airplane actually acting toward the center of the planet that it's flying near. We have air that could be of different densities, so the aircraft will have to work differently and stuff. So it's fundamentally a different discussion. Okay, so let's talk about this X-wing and look at drag and how drag might be a factor in this thing flying. So the X-wing comes in 2 different configurations, just like we configure the airplane for landing or we configure it for takeoff. This guy gets configured for attack, and the way that it does that is it spreads its wings out into this 4-place kind of wing configuration. And when it's in cruise, kind of in its cruise phase, it's more of just like a fixed wing, sort of like single wing situation. So a few things, thoughts about lift when it comes to the X-wing. Number one, that one of the ways that we can produce a lot of lift is by moving very fast through the air, assuming that the structure can take it. The X-wing's got 4 engines on it, and so theoretically it should be able to be moving very quickly. And you may recall from your knowledge tests, your private pilot or your commercial pilot knowledge tests, or from ground classes or other seminars that you might have listened to, that the control effectiveness and the lift produced of an aircraft is dependent on the speed of the airflow and the density of the airflow. That's what that performance is based on. So since the speed of the airflow contributes very much to how much deflection can be going on, and that deflection is what spawns that lift. The fact that this thing's got 4 engines means it's probably moving real fast and deflecting a lot of air really, really easily. So I'm not surprised if it is producing a lot of lift. However, there's a ton of drag, no doubt, on the spacecraft in the attack position, where you got all these, instead of like a single arm, that a single wing, that needs to slice through the air. Now you got effectively four shorter wings that need to slice through the air. Not to mention these broad, engine inlets or these cannons out here. You got a bunch of surfaces on here that are more sharp angled and geometric rather than smooth and with curvature. So kind of like the F-117, like the stealth fighter, that's all geometric and very rigid in its form. You got a ton of not only induced drag from the lift that it's producing, but a ton of form drag. Similarly to the Pitts S2 or the Pitts, S1, like these aerobatic biplanes that are very high lift, high induced drag airplanes also have a lot of parasitic drag on them, whether it's these slaved controlled like column arms right here that slave the ailerons together, or whether it's the cables that are gonna try and hold this thing nice and sturdy. It's got a lot of induced drag, so those lift and drag concerns are definitely something to consider. One of the coolest things that I found about the X-Wing was actually published in Popular Mechanics in a 2018 edition that somebody did this. Somebody actually looked at the drag coefficient on the X-Wing, and what the drag coefficient actually symbolizes is it's a unitless number that the smaller the number is, the more aerodynamically efficient it actually is. And what it does is it takes all different types of drag and it compiles it together, and it looks at that efficiency. Induced drag from the lift it produces and the parasitic drag, and compiles that with the lift it's producing. And there's an equation that generates this number. And apparently when it was put to the test, the X-Wing had a drag coefficient of 0.45, which might sound like kind of a low number, it's less than 1, until you realize that an actual airplane, an actual F-4 Phantom, This was a strike, an interceptor, in really heavily used in Vietnam. It's a stunning airplane. 0.02 is the drag coefficient of an actual airplane. So 0.45. I mean, that's essentially a brick. It's not, as you can see here, just by comparison, the drag coefficients for just some shapes like going through the air. It's not terribly better than an actual just a ball. So that I thought was very cool, an actual thing published in Popular Mechanics. All right, so let's look at this Luke's speeder and in ground effect and what we mean by ground effect. All right, so ground effect occurs, for anybody trying to land an airplane for the first time, or trying to work on landings. You are all too acquainted with ground effect, because it's been ground effect that has spoiled maybe a perfect approach, or something that seemed like it was a perfect approach. It's carried you down the runway longer than you'd want it to go when you're trying to put it on a specific spot for short field landing. It's maybe been the result of coming into ground effect like with too much energy, has been a result of a go around. So ground effect is something we're all too familiar with, and if we're smart about it, and we practice enough, we can actually use ground effect to our advantage in a lot of different ways. And that is definitely part of the secret to a perfect short field spot landing. But with this, let's look at the speeder. Actually, really quick, just to clarify, it's when we're really close to the ground. Ground effect is very close to the ground. So when we're coming in and we're above the ground, when we're 15 or 10 to 15 feet above the ground, all of a sudden, what normally were these swirling patterns of air that escape the wing as it produces lift, they counter rotating, swirling air vortices off of the wingtips. The ground obstructs those vortices and doesn't allow the induced drag to have a hold on the aircraft as it once did, now that the ground is actually breaking up those patterns. So there have been engineers that have utilized ground effect for aircraft very, very, very intelligently. We'll look at that in a second. But first, let's look at this. Let's look at the speeder here, right? Of course, it's fictitious, but we see a lot of the same characteristics in an airfoil that we already saw before. We see a rounded leading edge to deflect that air. It's a symmetrical shape. With the thrust from those jets coming out the back. I hope he has a multi-engine rating for that. I wonder if that'd be considered a multi-engine land, even though it never touches the land. And then the ground effect from this thing, being super, super close to the ground. It's riding on that pocket of air. The thing to note is that this speeder it cannot leave ground effect. It's perpetually in ground effect. And there's an aircraft out there that does exactly the same thing. That outside of ground effect, there's no way in hell that this thing is lifting off. Maybe due to power, lift and power ratio issues, or weight ratio issues, or whatever it might be. But this amphibious airplane rides in ground effect. It stays in ground effect, and as it does, it can island hop. It can take you to places very, very efficiently, due to the fact that it's got almost no induced drag. And so the engineers are tasked with maximizing this known fact and maximizing this efficiency. How can we go and get into wing design, and especially operating it over the water is awesome, because the air is nice and calm. Other things like that V-shaped T-tail. There are other design characteristics, but this is a ground effect airplane right here. All right, and then finally we got our last spaceship, the N1 Starfighter and wing design. This I don't know, man. This ship's really it's really growing on me as maybe one of my favorites. It's this super awesome looking one. I mean, who doesn't want those ice blue colored like jets to either side of you like that, and with that chrome? Come on. So let's talk about wing design and how this might produce lift, and if so, what kind of forces are at work here. So looking at a regular wing, and whether that's in your Sling or whether that's in your Cessna or your Piper or your 747, the wing design has not changed a whole lot. definitely there are variations in the the orientation of the wing with respect to the fuselage and the placement. Is it high? Is it low? Mid wing? Is it swept? All these different things. But the construction of them is the same, and it is based of a couple different principled pieces of anatomy. Number one, it's the spar. The spar is this main beam. Sometimes aircraft's got a couple spars in them, but it's the main beaming that goes from the wing root, from the fuselage of the airplane, all the way to the wing tip, to the outboard portion of the wing, and it forms a very stable backbone or central bone to the wing. I kind of like to think of it as your femur and your leg. It's just a super dense, strong member that can bear a lot of weight, and it takes a lot to break it. Then you got ribs, and these ribs over here are these, they basically look like ribs, you know what I mean? Like the ribs in a human body. They're like these way more thin, cross-sectionally cut pieces of the wing that form the skin. And it's kind of like, well, why not just make a solid wing? Why have a bunch of these ribs? It looks like a paint, you got to cut every single one. Each one gets a little bit smaller and different shaped and twisted a little bit differently as you go down the wing. Why not just make a solid wing, But the thing is you would have, first of all, it would be super heavy, because what you're going to do is not only make these ribs out of lightweight strong material, but you're also going to cut holes in those ribs to save on weight, So it's a great way to increase the structural integrity of the wing and not sacrifice weight. It also frees up space for fuel and lines and gear and all kinds of other things. So I just thought it was interesting when you look at the construction of the wing and how it allows this 747 to generate lift is very much the same when you look inside of the Starfighter. You got these ribs forming right here. You got this main spar right here, and then these ribs right here that would theoretically allow this fictitious spacecraft to generate the lift that it needs to produce as it's coming in from space or wherever down to Naboo or whatever planet this thing is operating on. And once it starts impacting the molecules, more and more and more molecules as it gets deeper and deeper into that atmosphere, it's going to need that structural integrity in order to resist those forces and resist the flexion that's going to result from the lift that it produces. And so this aircraft, at least ostensibly, is equipped to produce lift based on the strength and the of the innards of the wing itself. Now, whether it's able to do that efficiently or not is another matter. That kind of comes down to wing overall wing design. Here you have a bunch of different wing designs that you see on different types of aircraft. Swept wing on jet fighters, and here's a tapered wing that you might see on a Cessna that might be tapered like that, or a rectangular on a Cub, or this rounded elliptical on a Spitfire, something like that you'll see in regular airplanes. But this Starfighter's got a delta wing in the front of it. It's got what's called a tailless delta, and we see tailless deltas in the real world. We see them. This is a Mirage. This jet right here is this fighter jet's a Mirage, and it's one of many examples of a tailless delta wing. And a few characteristics of the lift that this Starfighter would produce, just like the Mirage produces as two examples of tailless deltas. Very high drag at low speeds. You think about how much surface area is over that wing, how much lift that thing is able to produce, being basically a kite with a jet engine on it. Think about the parasitic drag of that, though. How much material is on that, So there's a lot of drag going on at low speeds. The other thing about the high drag at low speeds is this idea of induced drag. It needs a very high angle of attack. This Starfighter, if it's flying at slow speeds through the atmosphere, it's going to need a high angle of attack, and from that, you're talking about a ton of induced drag, right? As we increase angle of attack, we increase the lift, we increase induced drag. We've got some other design characteristics here that I had to look up for myself personally in this intro to aerospace engineering textbook, as far as what the aerodynamic efficiency versus the stability trade-off. But this most definitely would produce lift. And I think I read in that study in Popular Mechanics that this Starfighter, whereas the X-wing was a 0.45 or something like that in the drag coefficient, the Starfighter was, I believe, a 0.1. Still can't hold a candle to the F4's 0.02, but 0.1 is definitely in the right direction considering 0.45. I mean, good thing that thing looks as badass as it does, because 0.45 is embarrassing. So anyway, that's it for the presentation as far as lift and Star Wars ships. And yeah, Lee, like, feel free to chime in at all, or provide any thoughts or anything like that. Either way, it was a ton of fun to put this together, and I think that we have a lot to learn from something like this, where we can kind of free our minds a little bit and just think about some fun things. But that just because we're thinking about fictitious fun things doesn't mean that we can't actually find the crossover and the application of something that is very real that we do need to be aware of as pilots, in something that's just fun to think about and a cool way to apply what we actually do need to know in real life.
Totally. Yeah, thank you so much. I wasn't expecting you to be so in depth. That was crazy. Holy crap. Oh, man. Phil, thank you so much. You saved this presentation. Yeah. That was awesome. I really loved how you merged all those ideas into our little Star Wars example. That was legit. So next time, I think what we'll do is we'll talk about drag, right? Because Phil was talking about drag almost all day, and we really haven't talked that much about it. So maybe we'll dive into drag a little bit more next time. We touched on today a little bit of my failures, which hopefully is an inspiration for you guys to be better than me and go out there and build like a really good wind tunnel, not a crummy one that has a rock in it. And also, just like Phil, he ran away with this presentation on Star Wars airplanes producing lift, or Star Wars ships, airplanes. Star Wars airplanes, they're not airplanes, they're spaceships. Okay, Star Wars spaceships producing lift. Let your mind wander. I mean, we got time nowadays, so maybe we'll make a little weird thing out of this, and hopefully Phil can grace us with his presence next time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. And I think that your experiment was awesome. I think it showed the importance of just trying new things, and putting your mind to the test and putting your theory to the test, and getting your hands dirty with something, whether it works out or not. And number two, really engaging the mind and trying to, I don't know, even a failed attempt at an experiment. That's the nature of experiments, and I admire your ability to think of something, try and include it, and I mean, that's the nature of an experiment right there. I thought it was perfect, you know what I mean? And it is encouraging. So yeah, I hope to get together again, and I appreciate you having me on, and I appreciate everybody at home watching as well. Let me know what you thought.
Yeah, really, real quick here, we actually have a comment from somebody. I'm going to see if I can get it on the screen. We have somebody wondering if the Millennium Falcon would be a lifting body, right? So,
right.
If you guys want to dive into this as viewers, we're running a little bit out of time. We really didn't prepare to be on here this long, but I mean, awesome that we are. I'm stoked about it. But maybe we talk about the Millennium Falcon next time, because I guarantee you the Millennium Falcon is one of the most draggy ships that we can talk about. So think about it. Do your own research. Maybe come in with comments next time. We're totally cool with throwing some comments up here and having a little discussion. Get involved with this. I mean, we're having fun presenting, so I'd love everybody to really jump in on this.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a great question, Mike, and thanks for the engagement. And for next time, I would put it to you to think about coming next time with the idea of maybe the Millennium Falcon in terms of parasitic drag, and what is it on the Millennium Falcon that would reduce that would result in that parasitic drag. Think about the thrust that it's able to produce to maybe overcome that. But that to me seems like a parasitic drag nightmare. So we'll have to talk about that next time.
All right, sweet. Thank you so much, Phil, and thanks everybody for joining us. We'll see you next Wednesday at 3:00, and we'll talk a little about drag. Peace.